Hey everyone, I'm with Rowell Dionicio. My name is Ryan Brunkhorst, and Rowell is a wireless engineer at Stanford University, as well as a host of the podcast Clear to Send and some other media outlets as well. So Rowell, if you don't mind, could you briefly kind of cover your educational and professional journey?
Yeah, sure. Educational, kind of the non-traditional route. I started out at ITT Tech,
Mhm.
which no longer exists.
Right.
So
I've met a lot of angry people because of that.
it did. I mean, it just shows you that sometimes that I just made the best of what I could with it. And I got a lot of networking background there, and I got a job while I was working there that had to do with that field.
Okay.
So I managed to be a systems administrator first. So my background is in systems administration. Then I made my way to network
Oh,
engineering.
interesting. Yeah, I kind of started in the help desk realm of things myself and moved
Yeah,
on.
that's where I
Uh,
started from the very beginning. My first IT job was IT help desk.
yeah, that's where we all have to kind of put in our grunt time.
I agree.
So cool. And then you just ended up at Stanford eventually from
Yeah,
various
yeah.
IT jobs.
I used to work in San Diego for a small MSP,
Mm.
and I knew someone that worked at Stanford, and they said there was an opening, so I applied and I ended up getting it.
Oh, really cool. Yeah, I worked for MSP for a short while. It's one of those things where it kind of burns you out.
It does.
So,
Yeah, it does. It's a very different here. There's a lot more people, but
yeah,
I'm able to learn a lot more at scale.
yeah. We're a lot smaller than you. I know you said on the Clear to Send, you said there's like 40,000 concurrent users a day. We're
Yeah,
around 12 to 1,500, I think, 2,000 at peak.
yeah.
So, but we still, wireless is important. So how did you get started producing content, and what made you want to share your knowledge with others?
Sure. I got started producing content because I was actually listening to other people's content first. There were two podcasts that I was listening to. I think it was Keith Parsons' older podcast before he renewed it,
Yeah.
and then I can't forget the name. It was started up by Blake Crony, um, No Strings Attached show.
Mm.
And so after I listened to their shows, there was no other shows to listen to, but I was still reading blogs. So I was still writing content and putting it out there, but I decided to start my own podcast to one, get myself out there as a professional, two, to get out of being like an introvert. And
Hmm.
then three, if I started interviewing people, I'd learn faster if I was to pick their brains.
That's kind of where I am too. It's funny because Keith Parsons is also a person that got me into wireless a little bit more, and
Hmm.
I saw him at Interop 2016, and
Okay.
he asked the whole room. He said, "How many of you have CCNAs?" And it was like 90% of the room. So how many of you have CWNAs? There's one person out of maybe 200 people. He goes, "How many of you deal with wireless every day?" And everyone raised their hands. He's like, "What's wrong with you? why don't you?
Yeah.
Why haven't you studied that?" And so I started looking for resources. I think shortly after that, I found your podcast, and it's been really helpful.
Cool.
Um,
Awesome.
so yeah, uh, and so on that note, how has interacting on social media enhanced your own knowledge and motivation to learn new things? And
Sure.
are there any points in time when you realize the benefits of engaging other people?
Yeah, so I would consider myself as someone who has gotten to where I've been through social media.
Hmm.
And so I'm still active on social media. I find that interacting with people on social media is the best way to get a hold of someone, especially people that you might have looked up to, because that's where they just might be. There's a lot of different folks that I looked up to, or I still look up to in the wireless industry, and by using Twitter, which is the biggest social network for like wireless professionals, it's very easy to get a hold of them, and then slowly you make your way to meeting them at conferences. And so that's helped me tremendously in one, getting access to people who have tremendous more knowledge than I do, and then that actually helps me as far as them giving me feedback on things that I do, helps me improve my work and my content.
Yeah, it's really interesting how a little Twitter message, leads to actually meeting these people in person. I've personally done it at like Microsoft Ignite. I've met a lot of the security pros and the program managers that actually produce create the products. I was at Aruba headquarters a couple weeks ago and was meeting like the guy who does ClearPass. He's the head of ClearPass,
Yeah.
And I was really surprised they would sit down with little old me and they wanted to sell us stuff, but sit down with little old me.
Yeah, they still get to sit down with you. So
yeah,
that's what's important.
So yeah, it's really cool how you can make these connections. So I know that I tend to avoid socializing online out of like fear of security, leaking too much information. I'm kind of trying to get over that myself. But I'm realizing, like you said, the importance of stepping out of your comfort zone if I want to grow, So what advice would you give people looking to broaden their educational horizons by networking with others if they're like shy or reluctant to leave their own personal bubble?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, Twitter probably gives you the best flexibility because, for one, you don't have to speak using your voice. You can just use text. It's far more easier to do it that way. But the way I would tell people to approach that is to try to contribute to a conversation versus trying to tear someone down on social media. Try to add to the conversation, add value, and then ask questions. I mean, some people will say there's no stupid questions. That, for me, there are no stupid questions. There are different people at different levels in their career. I was one of them when I didn't know that much. So whenever somebody asks what I would think or what other people would think is a really basic question, some of us have to remember we were once at that point. So go ahead and ask the questions. If it becomes a problem, just brush it off. It's not a big deal. To be honest, it's social media. You don't want to take it to heart. Some people talk a big talk on social media, but when you meet them in person, they're not quite like that. So it's more about having constructive criticism and constructive conversations online versus having this what do you call it? Like you have a specific stance or you have an agenda, basically.
Right.
Go in there and have just an open conversation. And I would say with social media, you have to have an open mind in order to understand what people are saying, what angle they're coming from, or what viewpoint they have, because you don't know what their experience is. It might have a very specific type of experience that might not be exactly what you've experienced. So you just have to be open in that regards.
Yeah, that's good advice. I kind of call it the Reddit or toxic effect of social media. I love Reddit. I've learned a ton from Reddit, and it's nice that I'm anonymous on there too. I stick on networking, sysadmin. I mean, SCCM. I kind of handle a lot of different things around here.
There's just a lot of snark on.
There's a lot of snark. I think there's a cranky sysadmin or something is the one guy.
Exactly.
I'm gonna tell you you're all idiots. I don't.
Yeah, exactly. And you just gotta ignore those guys. And there's gonna be guys like that. Just ignore them. It's just social media. It's just text, right? You can mute them. You can block them. You don't have to participate in conversations with them if they don't want to participate in the conversation with you.
Right. And I found like with professionals who really know their stuff, they're nice people. And even educators, we had to do like a Twitter chat with some educators, not really my engineering side of things. And I found they were so welcoming, like, thank you for joining us. Keep coming back, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So, it's pretty nice when you meet people like that. So sorry, I know we're probably running out of time, but are there any go-to websites that you go to stay up to date on new things?
I read some of the mainstream sites like Network World or Network Computing. I primarily rely on Twitter for the most part because people are just always constantly sharing. So what I do is I take a lot of those news and then I aggregate it myself, either through my podcast or I will write about it.
It's a bit more objective too, right?
It is, yeah. Well, if it's content that they're sharing from like a news site, then that's okay. But the way I take that news is a lot of times you got to take it with a grain of salt and just apply your own experience to it. But at first, if you don't have much experience, you'll just read it and you'll learn from it. And then when you talk to people about these news articles or these topics, that's when you truly learn about how is it applied in the real world. Because there's the news as it applies to the public, but then there's a different aspect to it when you talk to someone, say, in management or in engineering. It just depends.
There's always that sponsored content kind of warning and marketing angle that a lot of these articles are in. So I like
I wouldn't be too concerned. So it depends where the sponsored content's coming from, right? So if it's like a podcast with the sponsored content, That usually just means the vendor is just paying to have a dedicated spot on the podcast itself just to talk about their product.
Right.
Now, what I would look for in that is if the interviewer is going to be asking some critical questions instead of just agreeing to everything. So they might ask questions that have some opposing stance, and then you could hear the vendor talk about that. So as far as other podcasts that I would go to listen, Packet Pushers is one. I've always started listening to Packet Pushers since the beginning, and they've grown quite a bit. And really the sponsored content for them, because I know a lot of people will be against advertising, because on my podcast, there's a little bit form of advertising, but it's to either pay the bills. So if you have a vendor that's going to come speak, then really they're just going to talk about their product from their point of view, but it's up to us as the host to try to direct that conversation in a way where it's useful and valuable to the listeners. So really it's just to pay for either we're trying to make it as a living, right, to produce this content, or just to pay for hosting costs.
Yeah, I know you guys have had like MetaGeek on there, I think some Ekahau stuff, and it's handy,
and
actually. Tells me
it's usually for us, it's usually stuff that we use. So we try to have sponsors on of products that we are familiar with.
Yeah, I think we all appreciate that. And so I guess that's the end of my questions. How can people find you, and is there anything upcoming down the road for you?
Sure, yeah. People can find me on my podcast, cleartosend.net, on Twitter at Rowell Dionicio. I'm actually going to be at Cisco Live doing a lot of content there, so that'll be publishing after Cisco Live.
Is that over in Orlando this year?
Yeah, it'll be in Orlando. We're doing some live recordings, but those will be posted after Cisco Live, so that way it's available for everyone to listen if they want to hear something kind of Cisco-centric.
Okay, awesome. Well, I think that's it. Thank you so much for giving up this time. I appreciate it. It's for class, but also, me stepping out of my bubble, getting to speak to a real pro in the industry. So,
no, that's good. I mean, that's the next step. I always say, even though there's other podcasts and blogs out there, do it for yourself, not for other people.
All right, excellent.